She found herself against her will, curious. She crept to the doorway of his office and peered inside. The room was dark, save for the glow of his laptop screen. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands, his posture slumped and defeated. The perfect, composed CEO from the news was gone. He was just a man, tired and beaten down by the weight of his responsibilities. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slumped with a burden she could only guess at. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the Sterling Tower, 100 stories above the city. Inside his penthouse office, Julian Sterling watched the storm with the calm indifference of a man who owned the sky. At 32, he was a prodigy of industry, a CEO whose reputation was as sharp and unyielding as the glass walls surrounding him. His world was a realm of calculated risks and absolute control. He had built the Sterling Group into a global titan, a fortress of steel and finance that seemed impervious to the chaos of the world below. Julian was an emperor of his own making, and like any emperor, he had grown to believe his will was the only law that mattered. A small flicker of something other than hatred sparked in her chest. Empathy. She hated it. She hated that she felt sorry for him. He was the one who had taken her life. He was the one who had put her in this gilded cage, but she couldn't deny the reality of what she saw. He was a prisoner in his own way, a man fighting a battle for his life, his legacy. And now, for the life of their child. The night was supposed to be a quiet one, a final review of the quarterly reports before an early morning flight to Tokyo. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder and the soft whir of the climate control system. Julian felt a strange, tingling sensation start in his fingertips. It was a faint, almost pleasurable warmth, like static electricity, that he initially dismissed as fatigue. But it spread, rapidly, into his hands and then up his arms, blossoming into a searing heat that coiled in his veins. She turned and went back to the kitchen. She heated a plate of the pasta she had just made and a glass of water, then walked back to his office. She set the plate on his desk. He looked up, his eyes weary, then saw her. A flicker of surprise, then something else. A flicker of something. He didn't speak. He just stared at the plate, then at her. The meticulously ordered papers on his desk blurred. The polished chrome of his pen felt alien in his grip. He tried to stand, to find his phone, to call security, but his legs were led. A wave of dizziness crashed over him, a disorientation so profound it stole the air from his lungs. This was not fatigue. This was an attack. He was being poisoned. The poison wasn't a slow burn, it was a wildfire. It stripped away his control, his precision, his very sense of self. He was a marionette whose strings had been cut, now thrashing violently and without purpose. "Eat," she said, her voice quiet. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." His mind, a fortress of logic and reason, was under siege. Thoughts fragmented, replaced by a singular, all-consuming need, a feverish, animalistic desperation. He could barely stand. Leaning heavily against the desk, his knuckles white, he had no time to question how this happened. Who was behind it? The only thing that mattered was survival. He clawed at the air, his eyes darting frantically, searching for a way out, for a cure, for anything that could stop the agonizing fire now consuming his entire being. He looked down at the food, then back at her. For a moment, she saw the man from the night of the storm, the feral beast, the raw need. But it was fleeting. It was replaced by a look of profound, humbled gratitude. He picked up the fork and began to eat, slowly at first, then with a ravenous hunger that shocked her. She watched him, a silent, unmoving observer. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, a young woman named Maya was just trying to finish her shift. The rain was a nuisance, but it was nothing she couldn't handle. She worked for Swift Courier, a small delivery service that prided itself on speed and reliability. Her uniform, a simple navy blue polo and black pants, was damp from the storm. Her bag, slung over her shoulder, contained a single, small package marked urgent. The address was the Sterling Tower, top floor. She had never been to such a place before. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, intimidating in its sterile perfection. "Thank you," he said, his voice muffled by the food. It was the first human word he had spoken to her since she had come to live with him. It was a bridge between them, a small, tentative connection in the vast, cold space of the penthouse. A guard at the front desk, a man with a tired face, gestured her to the private elevator. "Penthouse," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Sterling is expecting it." She just nodded and turned to leave. She had given him a meal, a small act of kindness. She had not given him her forgiveness. She would never give him that. But she had seen a part of him that was not a cold, ruthless CEO, but a man, broken and alone, fighting for his life. And she realized, with a new, terrifying clarity, that she was not just a shield. She was an unexpected ally, a ghost in his machine, a small piece of humanity in a world of power and greed. The gilded cage was still a cage, but now it was a little less lonely. Maya nodded, her heart thumping a little faster than usual. She stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a whisper. She rode the ascent in silence, the numbers on the display flashing past like light-speed stars. She felt a strange pressure in her ears as the elevator shot upward, climbing higher and higher into the storm. When the doors opened, the air was different, colder, heavier. A sense of unease settled over her. The silence in the office was broken only by the rhythmic tap-tap of Julian's fingers on his keyboard and the distant, polite hum of the building's ventilation. The quiet moment of shared food the night before had passed, leaving behind a subtle yet undeniable shift in the atmosphere between them. The cold, sterile air that had once defined the penthouse now carried a faint, unspoken tension, a fragile bridge built on a bowl of pasta and a single word of thanks. She found herself in a small, well-appointed antechamber. There was a single, unmarked door at the end of a short corridor. She pressed the doorbell. It chimed, but there was no response. She pressed it again, a little longer this time. Still nothing. She checked her phone for instructions. The note simply read, "Leave package at door if no one answers after 2 rings." Julian was a man of routines and systems, and he returned to his work with a renewed, almost desperate focus. He spent his days in a whirlwind of virtual meetings and late-night calls, his mind a steel trap of numbers, strategies, and counter moves. He was fighting on multiple fronts. Aiden, his brother, was a cunning and relentless adversary. He was not just attacking the Sterling Group's stock price. He was eroding Julian's reputation, leaking carefully fabricated rumors to the press, and subverting key executives from within. Aiden's goal was not just to seize power, but to destroy Julian's legacy, to prove that his success was a fleeting illusion. As she turned to leave, she heard a sound from inside the office. A muffled thud. It was faint, but unmistakable. Her training told her to leave the package and go, but something felt wrong. The sound was not an accident. It was a crash, the kind of sound a body makes when it falls against furniture. A cold dread crept into her gut. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. She was a professional. Her job was to deliver packages, not to get involved, but her conscience, her deep-seated sense of right and wrong, refused to let her leave. Julian, however, was a master strategist. He had anticipated his brother's attacks and had already begun to implement a series of defensive maneuvers. He liquidated non-essential assets, consolidated key departments, and launched a disinformation campaign of his own, but he was fighting a war he couldn't see, a battle against a ghost who had the element of surprise. The source of the leaks, the identity of the traitors on his board, all remained a mystery. He was constantly a step behind, reacting to his brother's calculated strikes. She pushed the door open, a sliver at first, then wider. The room was dark, save for the flickering glow of the city lights reflecting off the wet glass. The faint light revealed a scene of disarray. A chair was overturned. A desk lamp lay shattered on the floor. And then she saw him. Meanwhile, Maya's days settled into a strange, lonely rhythm. She was a ghost in the vast penthouse, a silent observer of a world that was not her own. She would listen to the news reports, catching glimpses of the corporate war that raged around her. She would see Julian's face on the television screen, calm and composed, the very image of a man in control. It was a stark contrast to the weary, defeated man she had seen in his office. She was beginning to understand that the public Julian Sterling was a carefully constructed facade, a mask he wore to protect himself and his empire. Julian Sterling, the man from all the magazines and news channels. But this was not the confident and polished CEO she knew. He was on his knees, his body racked with tremors, his face a mask of primal fear and agony. His eyes were wide and unfocused, blazing with a feverish intensity. He was not a man anymore. He was a beast in a cage, desperate to break free. One afternoon, Maya was sitting in the library, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She was trying to read a novel, but her mind kept drifting to the news, to the stories of corporate sabotage and betrayal. She saw a glimmer of movement from the corner of her eye. Marcus Vance, the bodyguard, was standing at the doorway, a silent sentinel. She had grown accustomed to his presence, a constant reminder of her imprisonment. "Help!" The word was a rasp, a strangled gasp from a throat that had forgotten how to speak. "Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was the first time she had been summoned by Julian, and a knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. What did he want? Was he angry? Was something wrong with the baby? Maya, frozen in the doorway, stared in shock. She had no idea what was happening. Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was this a prank? An accident? The man was clearly in a state of extreme distress. He was a stranger, and a powerful one at that. Every instinct told her to run. She followed Marcus to Julian's office. The door was a heavy, soundproof barrier to the world. Marcus knocked once, and a voice from inside said, "Enter," but then his eyes, wild and bloodshot, locked onto hers. He didn't see Maya, the delivery girl. He saw a solution. He saw salvation. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of something sweet and earthy clung to her. It was the scent of her hair, the simple shampoo she used. A scent that for some reason, for some terrible reason, was like a siren song to the fire consuming him. Julian was at his desk, a multitude of documents and screens spread out before him. He gestured to a chair across from him, not looking up. Maya sat, her hands clasped in her lap. The silence was thick with the weight of her unease. He finally looked up, his eyes a sharp, analytical blue. "I need your help," he said. His voice clipped and to the point. "I have a problem I can't solve on my own." He lunged forward, a raw, inhuman cry tearing from his lungs. Maya gasped, stumbling backward. She tried to close the door, but he was too fast. His hand, hot and trembling, clamped around her arm. His grip was impossibly strong, a vice of flesh and bone. He pulled her into the room, kicking the door shut with a violent thud. Maya's eyes widened. "My help. What could I possibly do?" "No." "Wait," she screamed, her voice a thin thread of terror. "I'm just a delivery girl. What's wrong?" He slid a document across the desk. It was a dense, convoluted report on the Sterling Group's logistics and supply chain. "Aiden is attacking our distribution network. There's a pattern of delays and misplaced shipments, but I can't find the source. Every time we think we found the weak link, another problem arises. It's like a phantom, a ghost in the system." His response was a series of guttural sounds, not words. He was no longer communicating. He was acting on pure, desperate instinct. The drug had erased his humanity, his civility, his intellect. He was a predator, and she was the only prey in sight. He shoved her against the wall, his body pressing against hers, trapping her. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the tremors that shook his powerful frame. It was terrifying, overwhelming. He was a stranger, a powerful, deranged man, and she was alone, trapped with him. Maya stared at the document, a wave of confusion washing over her. This was not her world. She was a delivery girl, not a corporate analyst. "I don't understand. This is your world. This is what you do. What can I possibly do?" She struggled, pushing against his chest, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was strong for her size, but he was a man of immense physical power. Even in this state, her hands felt useless against him. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply, a shudder of relief passing through him. The scent was a balm to his burning body, a cool stream on an inferno. The desperate craving consumed him, a blind need to take, to possess, to extinguish the fire that threatened to burn him to ash. "You understand logistics?" he said, his gaze fixed on her. "You worked for a courier company. You know how packages move. You see the gaps, the inefficiencies, the human factor that all the data points and algorithms can't account for. My team looks at this from a macro level, from a corporate perspective. You see it from the ground up, from a human perspective. You are a professional in your own right. Maya, your profession is just on a different scale." His rational mind was a distant, terrified observer. watching in horror as his body, his home, was taken over by this monstrous need. He saw the terror in her eyes. He heard her pleas, her small struggles. A part of him, the real Julian, screamed to stop, to let her go, to apologize, to die rather than do this. But that voice was a whisper against the roar of the poison. It was a lost cause. He was an animal, and she was the only thing that could make the pain stop. She looked at the document, a foreign language of charts and graphs. But then, she saw something else. She saw a series of delivery routes, a map of the city she knew so well. She had navigated these streets for years, delivering packages from door to door. She knew the traffic patterns, the shortcuts, the moments of chaos and delay. She saw the problem not as a spreadsheet, but as a living, breathing thing. And so, he took her. He forced her down, his movements not of violence, but of desperate, agonizing need. She was his cure. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But the moment he touched her, the inferno in his veins began to subside. It was a slow, agonizing process. But the pain, the disorientation, the absolute horror of it all began to fade. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the report. She pointed to a series of delays that were scattered throughout the report. These, she said, her voice steady, these are not random. They happen during rush hour, but not on the main highways. They happen on the smaller secondary roads, the ones that are usually empty. It's a traffic jam, but not a natural one. Someone is creating them. Someone is intentionally slowing down the deliveries in those specific areas. He collapsed on top of her, his body finally going limp. The tremors stopped. His breathing became shallow and even. The fire was out. Maya lay beneath him, her body stiff with shock, her mind a blank, terrified canvas. The world was silent again, save for the rhythmic beat of the rain against the window. He was unconscious, his arm draped across her, his breath a warm, steady puff against her skin. She had survived, but something inside her was irrevocably broken. A part of her had been taken, stolen in a moment of madness and desperation. Julian stared at her, a flicker of surprise and professional respect in his eyes. His team of analysts, with their fancy degrees and sophisticated software, had missed it. They were looking for a software glitch, a hardware malfunction. They hadn't considered a manual, coordinated attack, a series of fake accidents, perhaps, or a team of drivers creating a blockade at key intersections. It was a simple, brilliant observation, a solution that came from a perspective he had never considered. After a long moment, she slowly, carefully, pushed his heavy arm off her. He didn't stir. He was a dead weight. She crawled out from under him, her limbs shaking uncontrollably. She got to her feet, stumbling once, and looked back at him. He was just a man now, a helpless, unconscious man. The monster had disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Her eyes fell on her delivery bag, which had been knocked to the floor. The package was still inside. She didn't care. The only thing she wanted was to get out. She was right. The problem was not a phantom in the system. It was a whisper, a silent act of sabotage that was not visible on the surface. Her professional knowledge, the kind he had once dismissed as insignificant, had just saved him countless hours of analysis. She had seen the truth in a sea of data, a needle in a haystack. She ran, a raw, unthinking flight. She ran out of the office, down the corridor, and into the elevator. She didn't press the button for the lobby. She just hit the button for the first floor, a desperate, irrational need to get as far away as possible. The elevator doors closed behind her, a final, silent farewell to the man who had stolen her innocence in a night of hellish torment. The package, left behind, would be the only thing connecting her to the monster she had just escaped. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, almost reluctant admission. "That's it. That's exactly it." He looked at her, a new appreciation in his gaze. She was not a possession. She was an asset, a valuable, indispensable asset. The first light of dawn struggled to pierce the dense clouds, casting a weak, gray pallor over the city. Inside the penthouse, the storm had passed, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Julian Sterling awoke with a jolt, his mind clear, his body heavy with a bone-deep ache he hadn't felt since his last episode. The memory of the night before hit him not as a rush, but as a series of disjointed, horrifying snapshots. The searing heat, the primal agony, the feral desperation. And then, the face of a girl, terrified, her eyes wide with shock and fear. He had expected to be a king fighting his brother in a game of chess, but now he realized he had a queen, a powerful, unassuming piece who saw the board in a way he never could. And for the first time since she had moved in, Maya felt a sense of purpose. She was not a prisoner. She was not a victim. She was a professional, and she was an unexpected, powerful ally in a war she had never asked to be a part of. He sat up, his head pounding. His office was a wreck. A shattered lamp, an overturned chair, papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. He saw the imprint of a small body on the leather couch, a ghostly indentation that made his stomach churn. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of shame and disbelief. The calm, calculated CEO was gone, replaced by a man crippled by a monstrous regret. He was no longer a king on his throne, he was a common criminal, a predator who had attacked an innocent. The collaboration between Julian and Maya was an unlikely alliance, a fragile truce born of necessity. Following Maya's keen observation about the sabotage in the logistics network, Julian's team of analysts, now working with a new directive, began a deep dive into the ground-level data. The theory held up. They found a series of small, seemingly unrelated accidents and incidents on specific, low-traffic roads that perfectly coincided with the delays. It was a brilliant, insidious plan that only a mind obsessed with control could have conceived. And it confirmed that Aiden was not just attacking the company from the top down, but from the bottom up, meticulously exploiting the very systems Julian had built. He remembered her scent, sweet, like honeysuckle and rain. He remembered her small, useless struggles. He remembered the desperate, soul-shattering relief he felt when the fire in his blood finally cooled. He had used her. He had taken her. The very thought was a physical blow. He stood, his legs unsteady, and stumbled to his private bathroom. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. A stranger stared back at him, his eyes haunted, his face pale and drawn. This was the man he had become, a man capable of such a vile act. With the first problem identified and a solution put in motion, Julian dispatched a private security team to monitor the key intersections and implemented a more dynamic routing system. Julian turned his attention to the next mystery. The leaks, he said. One evening in his office, as Maya sat across from him, a tablet in her lap. Aiden is getting real-time information, financial projections, private meeting minutes, even my personal schedule. He's always one step ahead. I've had my security team sweep the entire penthouse, my office, my car. They found nothing. There's no bug, no wiretap. The information is being given to him by someone close to me. A cold, hard knot of self-loathing formed in his gut. This was a consequence he had never considered. His illness, a rare genetic disorder, had been a secret, a weakness he had spent a lifetime concealing. The drug, a potent neurotoxin designed to destabilize him, had weaponized that weakness. But the cure was an innocent girl, a random casualty of a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. He had used her body as a shield against the poison. The thought was sickening. Julian's face was grim. The thought of a traitor in his inner circle, a viper he had unknowingly nurtured, was a bitter pill to swallow. He suspected several key members of his board, but he had no proof. His accusations would be a shot in the dark, and if he was wrong, it could shatter the trust of his entire organization. He had to find her. He had to make this right. Not for himself, but for her. His pride, his power, his entire empire meant nothing if he couldn't face the consequences of his actions. He walked back into the office, his eyes scanning the floor. He found a small, white plastic box with the words, "Swift Courier," printed on the side. The package she had been delivering. He opened it, revealing a small, unassuming USB drive. He was expecting it, but the details of the package no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was the delivery service. Maya, however, was not looking at the data. She was watching Julian. She saw the lines of stress around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands. He was a man drowning in a sea of betrayal, his professional life a tangled mess of deceit and lies. He was so focused on the external threats, the grand chess game, that he was missing something right in front of him. He called his security chief, Marcus Vance, a former Special Forces operative, a man whose loyalty was unquestionable. Marcus, Julian's voice was low, strained. "I need you to find a girl. She works for a company called Swift Courier. She delivered a package to my office last night." She set the tablet down and looked at him directly. "It's not your office or your car, it's your phone." Marcus's voice was a steady calm in the chaos. "Sir, a woman named Maya was logged in. She signed the delivery slip at 10:17 p.m. She left at 10:35 p.m. Is there an issue?" Julian scoffed. "My phone. It's on a closed network. It's encrypted. It's impossible to hack." Julian closed his eyes, the image of her face flashing in his mind. "Yes, there is a very big issue. I need her address, her phone number, everything. Now." "Not hacking," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. "Observing. He's not getting the data from a leak. He's getting it from a pattern." She gestured to the news reports of Julian's recent corporate outings and meetings. "All your important meetings, all your private dinners, they are all scheduled in your personal calendar. But you are a creature of habit. You don't use your phone much, but when you do, it's always at the same time. Every morning, at exactly 7:00 a.m., you check your calendar, and every night, at 11:00 p.m., you check your schedule for the next day. A hacker could simply use that window to infiltrate your calendar. He's not getting your data in real time. He's getting it right after you check it. That's why he's always a step ahead." Across town, Maya woke up in her small, cramped apartment, the sunlight a brutal assault on her senses. The night before was a blur of terror and disbelief. She sat up, her body aching, her mind replaying the awful events. The raw power of him, the desperate look in his eyes, the feeling of being completely helpless. She felt a profound emptiness, a part of her soul ripped away and left behind in that sterile, cold office. She wanted to scream, to cry, but no sound came out. She was numb. Julian stared at her, a look of profound shock on his face. He had been so focused on the grandeur of the sabotage, the high-tech espionage, that he had missed the most basic human element of it all, his own predictable habits. He was a man who lived by routine, a man who had his life meticulously planned and scheduled. His greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. She stared at the clock. It was late. She had missed her morning shift. She was a meticulous worker, a person who prided herself on being on time and reliable. This was the first time in her life she had failed to show up. She knew she couldn't go back. She couldn't face the world, not yet. Not with this hollow, broken feeling inside her. He ran to his desk, grabbing his phone, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. He called his head of IT security, a nervous, jumpy man named Carter. "Carter, I need you to do a full forensic sweep of my phone. Specifically, I want you to check for any unauthorized access that happens at exactly 7:00 a.m. and 11:00 p.m. I want every log, every IP address, every single data point." She tried to rationalize what had happened. He was sick. He was in pain. He was not himself. The monster was a man consumed by a fever. But the rationalizations felt hollow, like a flimsy paper shield against a tidal wave. It didn't change what he had done. It didn't change the fact that he had taken a part of her, and she could never get it back. An hour later, Carter called back, his voice trembling with a combination of fear and awe. "Mr. Sterling, you were right. There's a ghost in the system, an unauthorized access point, a backdoor that's been in your phone for a year. It's not a hack, it's a custom-built software, a Trojan horse, and it's been pulling your calendar data for the last 12 months. She went to her closet, pulling on a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit there and let the memories consume her. She had to move, to act, to find a way to make this horrible night disappear. She found her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. She thought about calling the police. A part of her screamed for justice, for him to pay for what he had done. But the logical part of her knew it was a lost cause. He was Julian Sterling, a man with more power and influence than she could ever comprehend. She was just a delivery girl, a nobody. Who would believe her? She would be destroyed, her life torn apart by lawyers and media. Julian's face went white. A Trojan horse. The only way that software could have been installed was by someone with direct, physical access to his phone. Someone he trusted. His eyes met Maya's, a look of dawning, terrifying realization on his face. The only people who had access to his phone were his two most trusted aides, his personal assistant, a loyal, efficient man named Michael, and his brother. Aiden was cunning, but he was not subtle. His brother would not have been the one to plant the software himself. It had to be someone else, someone Julian had entrusted with his life. She couldn't call the police. She couldn't tell anyone. This was her burden to bear, a secret she had to carry alone. She sat down on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands, and just let the world spin around her. Her phone buzzed. A new message notification. It was from Swift Courier. Maya, your uniform was found in the Sterling Tower penthouse. Please report to the office immediately to discuss. The next few hours were a whirlwind of action. Julian, with a cold, ruthless fury, ordered Marcus to bring in Michael, his personal assistant. Marcus, with the calm efficiency of a man who had seen it all, complied without a question. Michael, a man who had worked for Julian for years, was brought into the office, his face pale with confusion. Her blood ran cold. He had found her. He hadn't just used her and let her go. He was a man of power and resources, and he had already begun to hunt her down. The fear she had felt last night came rushing back. A cold, suffocating wave. She had to run. She had to disappear. But where would she go? He was everywhere. His face was on every news channel, every magazine, every billboard. She was a mouse trapped in a lion's den, and the lion had just woken up. Julian did not mince words. He laid out the evidence, the undeniable proof of the Trojan horse on his phone. Michael, with tears in his eyes, confessed. He had been blackmailed by Aiden, who had threatened to expose his personal secrets and ruin his family. He had been a loyal servant, but a coward, and his fear had turned him into a traitor. Maya knew she had to think. To find a way out, she had always been a survivor. She had been on her own since she was 18, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, saving every penny. She was a fighter, but she had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy who was a ghost, a powerful, ruthless man she had only met for a few terrifying moments. The world was his playground, and she was just a small piece in his game. The betrayal hit Julian like a physical blow. It was not the loss of a battle, but the loss of a man he had trusted. He had built his empire on loyalty and trust, and now he saw that even the closest to him could be corrupted. He was a king with no one to trust, a man alone at the top of a poisoned mountain. She got up and began to pack. She had to leave. She had to run. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. She was about to grab her backpack when her phone rang. An unknown number. She stared at it, her heart thumping in her ears. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, who it was. She let it ring, then hung up. It rang again and again, relentlessly. She turned off her phone and shoved it into her pocket. She had to go, and she had to go now. But as she opened her apartment door, she saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, a man who looked like a bodyguard. He was blocking her only way out. He had found her, but he had a new ally. An unlikely and unassuming ally who had seen what his high-powered team of analysts had missed. Maya. She had not only helped him uncover the sabotage, but she had also revealed the deep, dark well of betrayal that had been festering in his inner circle. She was not a possession. She was a partner, a strategist in her own right. She had seen the truth in a sea of lies, and she had done it with a simple, human perspective. The hallway outside Maya's apartment was narrow and smelled faintly of old cleaning solution. It was a space so mundane, so ordinary, that the imposing presence of the man in the dark suit felt like a jarring error in reality. He was a silent, unmoving sentinel, his posture suggesting both extreme readiness and absolute patience. When Maya saw him, the last vestige of her flight or fight instinct evaporated, replaced by a cold, numbing resignation. There was no escape. She had been found. As Julian looked at her, he saw not a victim, but a person of strength, resilience, and a quiet, profound wisdom. He had taken her world, but she had given him a new one, a world where the most powerful weapons were not money and influence, but loyalty and a keen, unwavering sense of observation. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Julian Sterling felt a flicker of hope. He was no longer fighting alone. He had an ally, a queen who had just saved his king. A moment later, Julian Sterling emerged from the elevator, a phantom in his own world. He wore a crisp, dark suit that seemed to have materialized from thin air, his hair still slightly damp from a shower. There was no trace of the deranged, feral man from the night before. His face was a mask of cold professionalism, his eyes dark and sharp, holding none of the wild torment she had last seen. He was a perfect statue of composure, the epitome of the ruthless CEO she knew from the news. This was his true face, the one he showed the world, and it was, in its own way, just as terrifying as the one from the night of the storm. The public unveiling of Julian and Maya's relationship was not a gradual reveal, but a calculated strike in the corporate war. Aiden, having lost his key source of information, grew desperate. He could feel Julian slipping away, the noose he had so carefully woven around his brother's neck now unraveling. He decided to play his last, most vicious card. He leaked the story of Julian Sterling's secret affair to a series of tabloid news outlets. The headlines were sensational, scandalous, and filled with thinly veiled accusations of impropriety. They painted a picture of a ruthless CEO using his power and wealth to exploit a vulnerable young woman. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a silent acknowledgement of his presence and his power. Maya felt a shiver of dread run down her spine. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of their shared, terrible secret. She opened her mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, to scream, but the words caught in her throat. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and indignation, yet she was powerless. She knew, instinctively, that this man was not here to apologize. He was here to handle a problem, and she was the problem. The tabloids, of course, did not mention a pregnancy, an illness, or a corporate war. They spoke only of a scandal, a sordid affair between a billionaire and a delivery girl. They used grainy, doctored photos of Maya, making her look cheap and opportunistic. The public, always eager for a juicy scandal, devoured the story. Julian Sterling, the unblemished emperor of industry, was suddenly a figure of controversy, his reputation tarnished by gossip and innuendo. Julian's gaze swept over her, a cool, appraising look that took in her rumpled clothes, her pale face, her trembling hands. It was the look of a man assessing an asset or a liability, not a person. "The uniform was a good start," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was chillingly devoid of emotion. "It's how we found you. I apologize for the intrusion, but this is a matter that requires my immediate attention. My name is Julian Sterling. I believe we have a situation to discuss." Julian, however, was prepared. He had anticipated his brother's move. He had already scheduled a press conference, a preemptive strike to take back control of the narrative. But he knew that this was not just a corporate battle anymore. This was a battle for their personal lives, for their reputation, for the future of their child. Maya's fists clenched at her sides, a situation she repeated, her voice thin and shaky. "You think what happened last night was a situation?" The word felt like a deliberate insult, a dismissal of her pain and trauma. He sat with Maya in his office, the air thick with tension. "He has made this personal," Julian said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "He is not just attacking me. He is attacking you. And he will not stop until he has destroyed us both." He did not flinch. His expression remained unchanged. "I understand your distress. However, it is imperative that you understand what occurred. It was not a personal act. I was poisoned. A powerful neurotoxin that triggers a genetic disorder I have. The effects are debilitating. The only known antidote is a rare genetic marker, a biological trigger that can counteract the poison. My family has been searching for it for years. Last night, in my compromised state, my body instinctively found it in you." Maya's hands were clasped so tightly they were white. She had seen the headlines. She had seen the vicious comments, the ridicule, the baseless accusations. The world she had once delivered packages to, was now a hostile, unforgiving place. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice a thin thread of fear. They're saying I'm a gold digger, that I'm using you." His words, clinical and detached, felt like a slap. He was explaining away his monstrous act with medical jargon, reducing her to a mere chemical reaction. He was a man accustomed to having his way, to controlling every narrative. He was not asking for her understanding. He was dictating a new reality. He gestured to the man behind her. This is Marcus Vance. He will escort you to a secure location where we can discuss this further. I assure you, you will not be harmed. We tell the truth, Julian said, his eyes hard and unwavering. All of it. We reveal my illness, the attack, your role as my unwitting cure, and the pregnancy. We will show them that this is not a scandal. This is a story of a family, of a shared struggle, of a fight for survival. We will show them the real enemy, Aiden. I'm not going anywhere with you, Maya said, finding her voice, a thread of steel in the trembling. I don't know who you are. I'm calling the police. Maya's eyes widened. The truth. All of it, Julian. Your reputation. A ghost of a cold, humorless smile touched Julian's lips. That would be unwise. The media would have a field day. You, a delivery girl, accusing Julian Sterling of… what assault? The very word would be drowned out in a sea of speculation and character assassination. My lawyers would dismantle your case before you could even finish your first sentence. Do you want your life to be a public spectacle? Do you want to be hounded by reporters and ridiculed by the public? He paused, his tone dropping to a low, persuasive whisper. Let me handle this, and no one will ever know. You will be protected. My reputation is worthless if I cannot protect the people I care about, he said, a look of profound resolve on his face. This was not the cold, ruthless CEO she had once known. This was a man who had been humbled by betrayal and fear, a man who had found a new, unexpected purpose. My illness, my greatest weakness, will now become my greatest strength. It will show them that my empire is not built on a house of cards, but on a foundation of resilience and the support of an unexpected ally. You, Maya. He wasn't offering a choice. He was presenting a fact. His words, though spoken with a terrifying calm, were a threat. It was a perfect, insidious trap. Her only path to safety was to comply. Defying him would lead to certain ruin. She felt the tears welling up in her eyes, not of fear, but of profound, helpless rage. She hated him. She hated his control, his power, his terrifying coldness. But she also knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was right. She was a mouse, and he was a cat, and the only way to survive was to play his game. The press conference was a maelstrom of flashing lights, shouting journalists, and a palpable sense of anticipation. The entire world was watching, waiting to see if Julian Sterling, the man who had it all, would finally crumble under pressure. Julian stood at the podium, his posture straight, his face a mask of serene composure. Maya stood beside him, her hands trembling, but her head held high. She was no longer a terrified delivery girl. She was a woman, a mother, standing beside the man who had wronged her, but was now fighting for her. She nodded, a single, defeated motion. Julian turned, a small nod to Marcus, and entered the elevator. Maya, with no other option, followed. The ride down was silent, a descent into a new kind of hell. They were taken to a nondescript black SUV, and she was driven to a discreet, private clinic tucked away in a quiet, forested part of the city. Julian began to speak, his voice calm and authoritative. He did not deny the story. He confirmed it. But then, he proceeded to tell a new story, a story of a rare genetic disorder, a debilitating illness that had been kept a secret for years. He spoke of the night of the attack, the poison, the desperate, unthinking act. And then he spoke of Maya. He spoke of her as a professional, a woman who had been in the wrong place at the right time. He spoke of her as a hero, a person whose very presence had saved his life. And then, he revealed the truth that no one saw coming. The pregnancy, inside. She was led to a sterile, white room. A woman with a kind face and sharp, intelligent eyes was waiting for them. She wore a white lab coat with a name tag that read, Dr. Eris Thorne. She was an elegant woman in her late 40s, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Julian, she said, her voice soft. I was so worried. Are you all right? A collective gasp went through the room. The journalists, who had been expecting a denial, a cover-up, were stunned into silence. This was not a scandal. This was a human story. A story of vulnerability, of strength, of a life created out of chaos. Julian, with a powerful, emotional clarity, explained how this child was not a consequence of an affair, but a biological miracle. The key to his survival. Julian gave a curt nod. I am fine, Eris. But there are complications. This is Maya. I need you to run a full diagnostic. Check everything. Genetic markers, blood toxicity, anything that might explain why she was able to stabilize me. My brother, Aiden, tried to destroy me with my illness, Julian said, his voice rising, filled with a righteous fury. But he did not know that my weakness would become my greatest strength. He did not know that in my moment of most profound desperation, I would find a cure, and he did not know that a woman he would dismiss as an insignificant delivery girl, would have the courage to stand by me and fight for a future that is not just mine, but ours. Dr. Thorne turned her gaze to Maya, a flicker of genuine sympathy in her eyes. Hello, Maya. I am Dr. Thorne. Don't be afraid. I am here to help. She then gently explained Julian's condition, a rare form of genetic hypertoxicity that caused his body to produce a potent, destabilizing toxin. The only thing that could counteract it was an equally rare counteragent, an enzyme found in a specific genetic sequence. Julian's body had reacted to Maya as a host for this antidote. The press conference ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, stunned silence. The narrative was no longer in Aiden's control. It was in Julian's. He had turned a scandal into a triumph, a moment of weakness into a show of immense strength. He had not just defended his reputation, he had rebuilt it on a new foundation of truth and vulnerability. Maya, listening to the medical jargon, felt a new wave of nausea. She was not a person to him. She was a biological tool, a means to an end. It was humiliating, dehumanizing. She was subjected to a series of blood tests, scans, and physical examinations. Dr. Thorne was gentle, explaining each step, but Julian remained in the corner of the room, a silent, imposing shadow. He watched the process with a detached intensity, his eyes fixed on the screens that displayed her vital signs, her genetic makeup. As they left the conference, a quiet sense of triumph settled over them. Julian, in a small or private gesture, reached for Maya's hand. She did not pull away. The touch was tentative, a fragile connection that had been forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. The world now saw them not as a CEO and his victim, but as a family. An unconventional, unlikely family, but a family nonetheless. They had faced their greatest fear and had come out on the other side, together. And in the face of their shared triumph, they both knew that the true war was not over, but their alliance had just become unbreakable. Hours passed. The sun rose higher in the sky. The results came in. Dr. Thorne reviewed them, her brow furrowed in a deep, professional concentration. She glanced at Julian, then back at the screen. Her expression was unreadable. Finally, she turned to them, a look of profound shock on her face. The press conference was a powerful blow to Aiden's plans, but it was not the final victory. It had shifted the public's perception, but it had not dismantled his network of corruption. Aiden was a snake, and he would not be defeated until his head was cut off. The final battle would not be fought in the media, but in the sterile, high-stakes world of the corporate boardroom. Julian, she began, her voice a hushed whisper. There is something here, something unexpected. The annual general meeting of the Sterling Group was just 2 days away. It was a formal, ritualistic event, a time for the CEO to present the company's vision and for the board to rubber stamp his decisions. But this year, it was a battlefield. Julian knew that Aiden, having lost the element of surprise, would use the meeting to make a final, all-out assault on his position. He would not just attack Julian, he would try to rally the board against him, painting him as an unstable, emotionally compromised leader who had put his personal life above the company's interests. Julian straightened, his posture rigid. What is it? Eris is the genetic marker. What we thought it was. What is it? Julian spent the next 48 hours in a state of high alert. He and Maya worked tirelessly, hunched over documents and reports in his office. He had a plan, a final, intricate maneuver to expose his brother's web of lies and corruption. But the plan relied on one crucial element: proof. Hard, undeniable proof that Aiden was the source of the sabotage. Dr. Thorne took a deep breath. She looked from Julian to Maya, her eyes soft with a sorrowful empathy. The genetic sequence is not an enzyme. It's something else. It's a biological synergy. Her DNA, when combined with yours, creates a permanent counteragent, And the reason we're seeing such a strong reaction is that she's pregnant. She is carrying your child. Maya, with her unique perspective, was indispensable. While Julian was meticulously preparing his presentation, she was poring over the data, not looking for numbers, but for a pattern of behavior. "He's not just attacking the company," she said, one night, her voice low and thoughtful as she scrolled through a document. "He's attacking you. He's not just trying to take over. He's trying to destroy you. He wants you to lose everything. He's been doing this for years, hasn't he? It's personal." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive blow. For Maya, the world tilted on its axis. The silent room spun. The sterile white walls became a dizzying blur. The sickness she had felt all morning, the feeling she had dismissed as shock and terror, was something else entirely. It was a life, a future, an inescapable biological connection to the man who had violated her. She felt her knees buckle, and she sank into the chair, the last of her strength leaving her, her hand trembling, went to her stomach. A part of him was growing inside her. "It's always been personal," Julian said, his voice grim. "He's always resented me. For being the firstborn, for inheriting the company, for everything. He's always been jealous." Julian's facade of composure shattered. His face, for the first time, was not a mask. It was a blank canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. His empire, his wealth, his power, they were all meaningless in the face of this. A child, his child, the consequence of his illness, his desperate act, had manifested as a new life that would be a perpetual reminder of his deepest shame. And yet, there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something that had never been there before, a fragile, tentative hope, a child with her DNA and his, a perfect genetic match. The cure, the true cure, was not a fleeting interaction. It was a bond, a family, a life. He had been a man without a future, a man whose life was a series of agonizing relapses. Now, for the first time, he saw a path forward, a future he had never dared to dream of. Then he would leave a trace, Maya said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Something personal, something emotional, something that's not about business. She scrolled down, and then she saw it, a series of small, seemingly insignificant wire transfers, payments to a shell company. The amounts were small, but the frequency was constant. Maya, sobbing silently, wrapped her arms around her stomach. She was no longer just a victim. She was the mother of his child. This was no longer just a situation. It was a devastating, life-altering reality. He had taken everything from her, and now he had given her something that could never be taken back. Her body was now a fortress, the one thing she had left to protect, and the man who had stolen her innocence was now, inexplicably, tied to her forever. Julian scoffed. "Shell companies are a dime a dozen. I can't prove he's the one behind it." The news of the pregnancy hung in the sterile air of the clinic, a silent, monumental truth that overshadowed everything. Maya, lost in a daze of shock, sat numbly as the doctor, Eris, spoke in hushed, urgent tones with Julian. The details of their conversation were a blur to her. Words like paternity, genetic compatibility, and long-term solution floated around her, each one a hammer blow to her already shattered sense of reality. She was not a person to them. She was a variable in a complex equation, a key to a problem they had been trying to solve for years. "Not on their own," Maya said, her voice filled with a sharp certainty. But what if these payments were not for corporate espionage? What if they were for something else? A private investigator, perhaps, or someone to make a fake traffic accident. Julian, his face a hard, unreadable mask, turned to her once Eris had stepped away. His eyes, though still sharp and analytical, now held a new, complex depth. A shadow of a man who had seen a ghost and was now confronted with a miracle. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, but still commanding. "The situation has changed. You are no longer just an interaction. You are now the mother of my child." Julian's eyes widened. He had been looking for a grand corporate conspiracy, and she was pointing to a series of small, mundane payments. He immediately put his team on it. Within hours, they had unraveled the shell company and traced the payments to a series of private detectives and a group of freelance operatives. The trail led directly to Aiden. The payments were not for corporate espionage. They were for the traffic sabotage, for the smear campaigns, for all the small, vicious attacks that had been chipping away at Julian's empire. The words were so blunt, so clinical. They stole her breath. "Your child," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You mean the result of what you did to me?" Her heart was a raw, bleeding wound. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him what he had taken from her, but the sheer weight of his presence and the terrifying reality of their new circumstance silenced her. "He's an amateur," Julian said, a look of profound, almost pitying contempt on his face. "He's been playing a game of corporate espionage, but he's been paying for it like a common criminal. He was so focused on my downfall, on the big picture, that he forgot to cover his tracks." He did not flinch from her accusation. "The circumstance is regrettable. My actions were unforgivable. I will not pretend otherwise. For a man of his pride and position, this was a profound admission of guilt. But the result is a life that, for some reason, holds the key to mine. This child is a cure, a permanent counteragent to the toxin in my blood. And because of that, this child is also a target." With the evidence in hand, Julian and Maya prepared for the final showdown. The general meeting was held in a massive, ornate conference hall. The air was thick with tension, with the whispered conversations of the board members, with the cold, predatory gaze of Aiden Sterling, who sat at the head of the table, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. Maya's eyes widened in fear. "A target? What are you talking about?" Julian began his presentation, his voice calm, confident, and professional. He spoke of the company's successes, of the new direction, of the future. The board members listened, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and skepticism. They had read the tabloid headlines. They had heard the whispers. They were waiting for him to falter. "My brother," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. "Aiden. He has been systematically poisoning me for years, hoping to destabilize me and seize control of the Sterling Group. The drug that brought me down last night was a new, more potent variant. He knows my illness is my greatest weakness. Now that he knows I have a potential long-term solution, he will do anything to stop me. And that means he will come after you. After the child." Aiden, unable to contain his impatience, stood up. "Julian, this is all very well. But let's be honest. The company has been in chaos for the last 6 months. The stock price has dropped. There have been leaks, sabotage. The public is losing faith in your leadership. I propose a motion to hold a vote of no confidence. It is time for a change in leadership." "Aiden?" The name hit her with a cold certainty. She had seen his face on the news, a man with the same sharp features as Julian, but with a colder, more predatory glint in his eyes. He had been a thorn in Julian's side for years, a rival in every sense of the word. He was the one who had planned this whole thing, who had orchestrated the attack. And now, she and her unborn child were collateral damage. She was no longer just a victim. She was a pawn in a brutal corporate war. The motion was met with a chorus of approval from a few of the board members, the ones who were secretly on Aiden's payroll. A hush fell over the room. The moment of truth had arrived. Julian, however, did not flinch. He did not show fear. He looked at Aiden, a cold, unwavering resolve in his eyes. Julian stepped closer, his presence a dark cloud that enveloped her. "I can protect you. I can protect our child. But I cannot do it from a distance. You are a civilian. An easy mark. Aiden has spies everywhere. He will not hesitate to use you to get to me. So, I will propose a deal. You come and live with me. In my penthouse. You will be under my direct protection, under the care of my security detail. Marcus will be assigned to you full-time. You will have access to the best medical care in the world. You will have everything you and the baby need. And in return, you will give birth to this child, and you will stay out of the way." "Before we vote," Julian said, his voice a commanding roar that filled the room, "I have a final presentation, a final truth to reveal." The cold, calculated nature of his proposition was breathtaking. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. He was buying her unborn child, and their future with the promise of safety. He was a businessman, a man who saw everything in terms of transactions and deals. This was the ultimate deal. A life for a life, a future for a future, her body for his safety. He gestured to a large screen behind him. The first slide was a picture of Julian and Maya from the press conference. He spoke of his illness, of the attack, of Maya's role, and of the pregnancy. He spoke with a profound honesty and a vulnerability that was so powerful it silenced every murmur in the room. He was not a CEO. He was a man, a human being, who had been attacked. Maya's mind reeled. She could refuse. She could run. But where would she go? The city was his. He had already found her once. Aiden, the man who had poisoned his own brother, would not hesitate to kill her. She was a vulnerable, scared girl with no resources, no protection, and no one to turn to. He was offering her a gilded cage, but outside that cage was a jungle filled with hungry predators. Then the slides changed. The next slides were a series of screenshots, of financial reports, of wire transfers, of emails. It was a meticulous, irrefutable display of all of Aiden's lies. The fake traffic accidents, the payments to the shell companies, the clandestine meetings. Julian laid out the entire conspiracy, step by step, with a brutal, unsparing precision. What about my life?" she asked, her voice hollow. "My job? My apartment?" Aiden's face, which had been a mask of smug confidence, went white. He stood up, his face a mask of fury. "These are lies, fabrications. You can't prove any of this. They are meaningless now," Julian said, with a brutal, unfeeling honesty. "You can't go back to your life, not with Aiden on your trail. I will buy your apartment. I will make sure Swift Courier understands you have been reassigned. Your old life is over. Maya, this is your new reality. You have no choice." "I can," Julian said, his voice a cold whisper of steel. "And I will." He then introduced Maya. "This is Maya. She's a delivery girl. A woman you would have dismissed as insignificant. But she has a talent, a perspective you lacked. She was the one who saw the patterns. She was the one who saw through your elaborate lies. She was the one who found the evidence that will bring you down." His words, though harsh, resonated with a terrifying logic. She had no choice. This was a battle she couldn't win on her own. He had broken her world, but he was also the only one who could put the pieces back together, albeit in a way she never would have chosen. He then showed the board the final slide. It was a picture of Aiden at a private meeting with a group of people who had been implicated in the conspiracy. The picture was from a private security camera. It was a final, undeniable piece of evidence. A knockout blow. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away with a fierce, defiant hand. She would not let him see her break. She would not give him the satisfaction. She was a survivor, and she would find a way to navigate this new, terrifying world. She would play his game, but she would not be a pawn. She would be a queen, protecting her child, her only remaining hope. The room erupted. The board members, who had been on the fence, were now in Julian's corner. They saw the truth. They saw the viciousness of Aiden's attack, and they saw the strength and resilience of Julian, and the quiet, unwavering courage of Maya. Aiden, defeated, humiliated, and exposed, was not just voted out of his position, he was shunned. His reputation was in tatters. He had tried to destroy Julian, but in the end, he had destroyed himself. Justice had been served. "I'll do it," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'll go with you. But you will not treat me like a possession. You will not tell me what to do. I will do this for my child, and my child alone. I will not be your pawn. Julian Sterling. I will be your ally." Julian stood at the podium, a victor. He had won the war, and he had won back his life. He looked at Maya, who was standing at the back of the room, a small, triumphant smile on her face. She was not a possession. She was not a victim. She was a hero, and he knew, with a new, profound clarity, that he would never be able to repay her for all she had given him. He had taken her life, and she had given him back his. A flicker of surprise crossed Julian's face, a brief flash of admiration. He had expected tears, protest, a breakdown. He had not expected defiance. He had seen her as a victim, a fragile thing to be protected. He was starting to see a new side of her, a core of strength he hadn't anticipated. The defeat of Aiden was a turning point, not just for the Sterling Group, but for Julian and Maya's relationship. The public perception had shifted. The media had moved on to a new scandal, and the corporate war was over. Julian was not just a victor, he was a hero, a man who had faced a personal crisis with honesty and strength. He had been an emperor in his own right, but now he was a king with a queen at his side. A deal then, he said, extending a hand. His hand was large, warm, and powerful. It was the same hand that had taken her, that had caused her so much pain. But it was also the hand that was now offering her protection. The gilded cage of the penthouse was no longer a prison. It was a home. The silence that had once been deafening was now filled with the gentle hum of a shared existence. Julian, no longer consumed by his battle with Aiden, found himself with a newfound freedom. He was no longer a prisoner of his work. He began to spend his evenings not in his office, but in the living room, a silent, comfortable presence as Maya read on the couch. Maya did not take it. There is no deal. Julian, there is only an understanding. We are doing this because we have no other choice, and one day you will answer for what you have done. He watched her, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in his gaze. He saw her not as a biological tool, but as a person. He saw her quiet strength, her resilience, the subtle way she held her hand over her stomach when she thought he wasn't looking. He was beginning to see the woman, the human being, the mother of his child. He lowered his hand, a look of profound, almost imperceptible respect in his eyes. He had expected her to be a fragile vase, but she was a rock. This was not a negotiation. It was a truce. The two of them, a powerful CEO and a terrified delivery girl, were now bound together by an act of violence, a biological miracle, and a shared enemy. He had taken her life, and now he was offering her another. An unwilling alliance, a gilded cage, to protect the life that was growing inside of her. And as they left the clinic, she felt a terrible, unsettling truth sink in. She was no longer just Maya, the delivery girl. She was now a mother, a target, and an unwilling ally to the man who had stolen her future and given her a new, terrifying one. One evening, he came home to the smell of roasted chicken and vegetables. A smell so warm and inviting it felt alien in the sterile perfection of the penthouse. He walked into the kitchen and saw her, standing at the counter, her hair tied back, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked up, a small, tentative smile on her face. The Sterling Tower penthouse was a monument to wealth and power. It was a space so vast, so meticulously designed. It felt less like a home and more like a museum. The floors were polished marble that reflected the ceiling's hidden lights. The furniture was a minimalist collection of avant-garde designs, and the art on the walls looked as if it belonged in a gallery. It was a cold, empty place, a gilded cage with a view of the world. And Maya, with her small, worn suitcase, felt like a misplaced piece of clutter. "I made too much," she said, her voice soft. I thought you might be hungry." The day she moved in, she was escorted by Marcus Vance, the silent, imposing bodyguard. He showed her to her new room, a luxurious suite that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a cloud of down and silk. The bathroom was a spa-like sanctuary of glass and stone, and a walk-in closet was filled with clothes. All new, all expensive, all in her size. It was a shocking display of power, a silent message that Julian Sterling could buy her anything, including a new life. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, a look of profound, almost childlike wonder in his eyes. He had been a man who had everything, but he had never had this. A home-cooked meal, a quiet moment of humanity. He sat down at the counter, and they ate together, in a silence that was no longer awkward, but comfortable. They talked about nothing in particular. The weather, the city lights, the book she was reading. It was a simple, mundane conversation. But for Julian, it was a revelation. He was not a CEO. He was just a man, eating dinner with a woman he was beginning to realize he was falling for. He wasn't there when she arrived. He was in his office, as always, a ghost in his own home. He left a message with Marcus, a single, clipped instruction. Make sure she is comfortable. Give her anything she wants. Do not let her leave. Maya, in turn, began to see a new side of him. He was not the cold, unfeeling man from the corporate world. He was a man who was burdened by his past, a man who was slowly, painstakingly, learning how to be a person again. He was a man who, in his own way, was just as much a victim of his illness as she was of his actions. She saw him smile, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and she felt a flicker of something in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something that felt a lot like understanding. The words were an anchor, a constant reminder of her status. She was not a guest. She was a possession, a valuable one, a protected one, but a possession nonetheless. She spent the first few days in a state of quiet despair. The silence was deafening. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city, the soft padding of Marcus's footsteps in the hall, and the occasional whir of the cleaning staff. She felt suffocated by the luxury, a constant gnawing reminder of her loss of freedom. As the months passed, their relationship deepened. They did not speak of the past, of the terrible night that had brought them together. It was an unspoken wound, a scar that would always be there. But they spoke of the future of their child. They would spend hours in the nursery, a room that had been designed by the best interior decorators in the world. But that was now filled with the quiet, joyful clutter of two people preparing for a new life. They would argue over paint colors, laugh at the absurdity of a baby needing a diamond-encrusted rattle, and sit in a quiet, peaceful silence. Their hands, for the first time, not at odds, but in a tentative, shared warmth. She tried to find a routine. She would wake up, eat a lonely breakfast at a massive dining table, and then try to fill the hours. She would read books from the vast, leather-bound library, watch television on a screen so large it felt like a movie theater, and stare out the window at the cityscape below. The city she had once navigated with a map and a delivery bag was now a sprawling, abstract painting, a world she could see but never touch. She was a prisoner in the sky, a bird with clipped wings. The Sterling Tower, the fortress of steel and finance, was no longer a symbol of Julian's power. It was a home. It was a sanctuary, a place where a man who had been a prisoner of his illness and a woman who had been a victim of his actions were now, against all odds, building a family. They were an unlikely couple, a living testament to the fact that a terrible act, a moment of profound darkness, could also be the start of a new, unexpected, and beautiful future. Julian was a fleeting presence. He would leave before she woke up and return long after she'd gone to bed. Sometimes, she would hear the soft clink of a glass or the closing of a door in the night, a distant reminder that he was there. He was a phantom, a living metaphor for her new life, a man whose actions had irrevocably changed her world, but who was now a distant, unfeeling figure. One night, as Maya sat in a rocking chair, her hands resting on her swollen belly, Julian came and sat on the floor beside her. He looked up at her, a profound look of regret and love in his eyes. "Maya," he said, his voice a low, humble whisper. "I have never apologized for what I did. I was a monster. I had no control. But that is not an excuse. I am so sorry. I know I can never undo it, but I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making it right. I will be a father to our child, and I will be a partner to you. I will not just protect you, I will cherish you." After a week, the silence became unbearable. Maya decided she wouldn't be a victim anymore. She would not sit around and wait for her life to happen. She would take back a small piece of control, no matter how insignificant. She started to explore the penthouse. She found the kitchen, a gleaming, stainless steel masterpiece with more gadgets than she could comprehend. She began to cook. Cooking was a small, familiar act that grounded her. The familiar feel of a knife in her hand, the smell of garlic and onions sizzling in a pan, the warmth of the stove, it was all a comfort in this cold, sterile world. Maya looked at him, a tear rolling down her cheek. He was not just saying the words. He was living them. He had been a broken man, a man consumed by his own pain. But he was now whole, healed by the very person he had wronged. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently rested it on his cheek. "I know," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know you will." She made simple, familiar meals. Pasta with a rich tomato sauce, chicken and rice, hearty soups. She would leave a plate for Marcus and the staff, a small gesture of humanity in a place that had none. She never left a plate for Julian. He was still the enemy. She had not forgiven him. Not yet, but she had begun to heal. And she knew, in her heart, that the love that was growing between them was not a product of the terrible night that had brought them together, but a new, beautiful, and unexpected future. The past was a wound, but the future was a promise of a family, a life, and a love that had been forged in the fire of their shared pain. One night, as she was putting a plate of pasta away, she heard the front door open. It was late, past midnight. Julian. She froze, her heart thumping against her ribs. He walked past the kitchen, his footsteps heavy and tired. She could hear him sigh as he went into his office. She knew he had been working tirelessly to combat his brother's attacks. She had seen the news, reports of stock drops, corporate leaks, and board meetings gone wrong. He was fighting a war, and she was a shield he had to protect.